Hey, thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi, joined by our 9 News health expert, COVID extraordinaire, so many titles. I'm Dr. Payal Kohli. Thanks so much for joining us here, Dr. Kohli.
Thank you for having me, Chris. I love that COVID title that you just gave me.
Yes, I know. And, well, now I have the COVID dummy title applied to myself. I got COVID last week. The reason we'll apply some of that to this here today, but we do want to discuss COVID. I know everybody's bored of the topic. I get it. But folks, it's still prevalent. It's still out there. And in some cases, we were just chatting with Chris Vanderveen as well, that this may be the second highest wave here in Colorado. It is everywhere right now here in the middle of the summer. Dr. Kohli, what are some of the top line takeaways about what we should be doing, what we should know right now with COVID?
Well, we should know, as you said, Chris, that it hasn't gone away, even though we want it to. In fact, 300 people a day are dying from COVID nationwide. That's an airplane full of people. So it's still causing severe illness in some people. It's not just a cold for those people. And they're estimating about 120 to 140,000 daily infections in the United States. But there's actually data that suggests that we may be underestimating that 7 to 10-fold. So the actual numbers, Chris, maybe 1 million infections a day, 1 million new infections, because now people are testing at home. So we're not really even able to see where we're going. It's almost like we have a blindfold on our eyes that is leading us to believe that this infection is gone, where, as you said, there's actually infection all around us. And people who've already been infected with COVID once are now even getting reinfected. And at this point, I think every single one of us has either had it or knows somebody who's had it and recovered from it. But that still doesn't mean you're in the clear.
Just maybe before we get into some more of those other topics, I think it's important for people at home to know, what should you do, just to repeat, if you come down with COVID? You have those symptoms, you wake up, you have, let's say, an at-home test, you test positive. What should people do at that point?
So the first thing, most important thing, obviously, is isolate yourself, because most of the variants now circulating in the community are that BA.4 and 5, which are the most contagious variants that we've had so far. Their growth rate is really high. And so you don't want to expose anyone else in your family, even if they may already have had COVID, because they could be at high risk of reinfection. And the second thing you want to do is make sure you make a call to your doctor to see if you need or qualify for the medication, which needs to be started within 5 days of symptom onset, called Paxlovid, and it's a Pfizer medication. And it really does help reduce the duration of symptoms, reduce your infectivity, so you're actually contagious for a shorter period of time. There's even data that can reduce the risk of long COVID and complications that can occur from that. So don't just turn on the television and take some ibuprofen. You may actually want to make that call and see if you might need something a little bit stronger. Certainly if you're immunocompromised, or don't have an intact immune system, then not only would you need that, you might even need potentially additional therapies as well.
Okay, good to know. All right, so you mentioned BA.4, BA.5. What you mentioned that they have high growth rates, high infectivity. What else do we know about this?
We know that they're derived from the parent variant. So the parent is the Omicron strain. And I always like to tell my mom I'm smarter than her. And I think most of us tell our parents that. And so this particular child is smarter than the parent. So the 4 and the 5, particularly the 5, are more intelligent, because not only do they have the mutations that the original Omicron had that made it spread efficiently, but they also trick our immune system. So our antibodies, whether that's from natural infection or from vaccine, don't recognize this variant as well. They don't work as well to neutralize it. So it becomes more contagious and more infectious. And all this is really layered on a background nationwide of us, having fun over the summer, traveling, not having mask mandates anymore. So many of the indoor places like shopping malls and grocery stores, et cetera, we don't have masks anymore. So this is really facilitating the spread of this infection and actually making this the fastest growing variant to date that's been out there.
So the obvious behavioral adjustment that should be taken now is to reapply those masks in public settings?
Yes. I mean, we have to mitigate, and that involves two things. One is vaccines and boosters. So if you haven't been vaccinated or boosted, go and get that, because that'll protect you against serious illness, from the 4 and the 5. It'll keep you out of the hospital. It doesn't necessarily guarantee you won't get the infection, but it'll keep you out of the hospital. And then the second is to start to reintroduce those measures. A lot of us have really gotten the sense that, it was here, but now it's gone and the pandemic is over and we have to, quote unquote, live our lives and get our lives back to normal. What we're not realizing is that what we do today will set us up for the next 6 months, for the fall, for the winter, for the next year. And if we don't start mitigating, we're going to facilitate the spread of the infection. And we may end up getting now another new variant come this fall or come this winter, which may actually end up being more aggressive and making us sicker, which so far these Omicron variants and subvariants, at least thankfully, haven't been making us sicker. But we already have data coming out of India where there's a BA.2.75, which is now also in the United States, total of 9 countries, that potentially is even more efficient than the BA.5 variant.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
So, okay, with that said, the symptoms have generally led to people not getting that ill, though you said that 300 people a day are still dying from COVID, so this is not nothing. The common refrain I hear, and again, I don't mean to, this is not my opinion, this is the common refrain out there, is that, well, it's just a cold, it's just a general illness. You know, I'm tired of the masks. What's your counter to that?
A couple of things I would say. So first, you're right. So for most people, it probably will have mild symptoms. In fact, we're seeing that you're not getting as much fever or muscle aches. You're just getting more of a runny nose, a sore throat, etc. with BA.5. But getting that infection, it's not just a cold because we don't yet know what the long-term effects are. In fact, we're getting data that tells us that people who've gotten, infected with COVID more than once are at higher risk for severe organ damage, lung damage, heart damage, pancreas, which makes insulin. They're at higher risk for developing long COVID as a sequela. And they're just at higher risk in general of having worse outcomes if they have that infection multiple times. So even though it may just seem like a cold, we don't yet know what the long-term consequences are of getting it over and over again. Getting it also doesn't give you a free pass because the immunity only lasts a few weeks and then goes away, and then you're sort of susceptible again. And in fact, we've seen reinfection occurring multiple times. So the more you can protect yourself, the better. And then the third reason, of course, is that every person that gets it facilitates the spread of the infection, which opens the door for new variants to emerge.
Speaking of new variants, how worried are you at this point about the fall and the winter based on current trends?
I'm starting to get worried. I don't think we need to panic because I think we have all the tools in our toolkit to really make it a better fall-winter season. So the first is the vaccines. I really hope we see an expedited BA.4, BA.5 specific vaccine. Now, the FDA has mandated that of the vaccine manufacturers as of June, but I want to see that in the next month or two. I really want to have our ducks lined up by the time September comes so that we are ready to distribute that vaccine on a large spectrum. So I think that'll really help. The second is we know how to dance with this virus. When it moves, we move. And it just moved. It made a big move with this BA.5 variant. And now it's time for us to reciprocate. And personally, I'm putting on my mask whenever I go anywhere into a crowded public space, whether it's a shopping mall or a grocery store, anything like that. Outdoors, I don't wear it as much because we know that even though this is more contagious, it doesn't spread as efficiently outdoors unless there's super close contact. But I think it's time to think about introducing those masks back into our life. I know we hate them. I know they're a pain. I know they're annoying, but they really empower us to take control of the narrative and really shape where this goes. Otherwise, we end up being one step behind and essentially falling victim to what the virus is doing, which ends up being more and more infections, more and more variants.
Well, when it comes to variants and when it comes to those vaccines, you mentioned that you want to see the FDA come out with a specific one for BA.4, BA.5. But is there, in my mind, my uneducated mind on this, is there not a thought that there's a little dog chase tale where it's just, there's going to be a new variant out there, this 2.75 in India. Is it too late, essentially?
It is. And I think that's the problem. We're one step behind. But the thing is, the variants that emerge usually emerge from the lineage of the parents. So if you target the parent, even if you end up being one step behind, you potentially could have some cross-reactivity. Now, of course, that's not true with 4 and 5 because they're an escape variant because they've escaped our immune system, even though they come from Omicron, which is BA.1. But I think in general, they're probably going to protect us better against Omicron, a 4 and a 5 vaccine, than the original Wuhan strain, which now at this point is, over 2 years old. We don't even really know that it's circulating very much because it's not a dominant infection, because these other ones are just much more easily transmissible.
Okay, so yes, that's something reasonably positive. Anything else maybe positive good to close out with?
Well, I think we're in a really good place in general because we figured out how to keep people out of the hospital. We've been lucky that these variants are not more virulent, even though they're more contagious. They're not making people sicker, so it's keeping people out of the hospital. But I think we should use that advantage to our benefit at this point so that we can really buy ourselves some time. And the fall is coming, so I want to remind everybody, of course, about the flu shot, about getting your COVID booster if you haven't gotten that already. Just making sure all your ducks are lined up in a row, because this particular year we may see a worse flu season just because for the last 2 years or so none of us have really been exposed to the flu very much. The flu activity has been very low because of the fact that we're wearing masks, and since those have mostly come off now, this might change.
All right, good advice. I appreciate that. Dr. Payal Kohli, thanks for giving us an update here on COVID, and thanks for joining us here on News Plus.